All right.
That was informal, yes.
All right, the way we're gonna do this, Village Attorney Bob Davis is gonna moderate this evening, but Gary and I are gonna open our respective boards and council independently, and we'll go from there. So I call this meeting to order for the Village Council on Tuesday, April 16th, 2019.
All right, likewise, I call this meeting to order. This is the special joint meeting notice for the Village Council and Planning Commission dated 16th of April 2019 at 6:30 p.m.
Thank you.
For an hour in order.
Madam Clerk, can you call the roll call for the Village Council, please?
Sure. Bailey?
Here.
Frost?
Here.
Helmut?
Yes.
Kemp? Here. Logan?
Here.
Planning Commission?
Madam Secretary, would you be kind enough to call the roll for the Planning Commission, please?
Baylor?
Here.
Bama?
Here.
Cook?
Here.
Curtis?
Here.
Douglas?
Here.
Helmut?
Yes.
Pilot?
Here.
Good.
Both bodies have a quorum.
Good. Thank you very much.
Double pay.
So at this time, we'll entertain a motion to...
Pledge of allegiance.
Oh, right, sorry. Pledge allegiance and honor silence. I pledge
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. A motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So moved.
Someone from council should second.
No, it's got to be from council.
Second.
There's been a motion to approve the agenda as presented. I would support. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
Same motion for the planning commission.
Thank you very much, Mo.
I'll second.
All right, I have a motion on the table to approve tonight's agenda from the Planning Commission, and a second on that. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. All right, that motion carries well. We have an approved agenda for tonight's meeting.
Mr. Davis?
Yes, if I could start the dialogue here. We have the village legislative body, and we have a village planning commission with us. So we have the policymaker and the ultimate decider on ordinances, and we have the body here with us who would draft ordinances upon direction. We're only missing our ZBA, who maybe later interpret the ordinance, or defend the ordinance, or give a variance to the ordinance. So we have two key bodies here. It is the duty, and we've talked about this at meetings, it's the duty of the village council to set the policy direction and the directive with respect to these type of issues. So the village council would be the body who would contact the planning commission and give direction to the planning commission as to the policy direction that the village would like to undertake. The planning commission then does its work, and it does its work, and then it submits something back to, oh, everyone look at Joe. He wanted us like in action. So the planning commission would then do as directed by the village council, make its recommendations back to the village council for potential action, no action, or modified action. That's how we would work procedurally. As you know, historically there was a medical marijuana law that was passed in Michigan, and the primary difference between that law and this law is that with medical marijuana, if you did nothing, you were presumed to not want it. So you didn't even have to live, if you didn't want it, you didn't have to do anything. And I think at that juncture, the village did nothing, and therefore medical marijuana, we passed on medical marijuana. With respect to this law, the MMFLA is just the opposite. If you want to not do something, if you want to prohibit these types of activities in this community, then you have to do something. About 400 communities in Michigan have done that. More than half of those have done that with the idea that their legal advice has been, if you opt out of it, you can opt back in if and when the state issues its final regulations on what they're expecting. The state has said that they will not be issuing their final regulations on this until December of 2019. The new governor believes that they will be issued in June of 2019. As of a phone call conference this morning, the governor is very committed to having these out earlier than later. So a lot of communities not knowing what the state was going to allow or what the criteria was going to be or how many numbers could be involved or what you could do with respect to citing, have decided to wait until those regulations are issued, and then they will repeal their prohibition and open up a discussion for possible ordinances. Other communities will probably just repeal it for other reasons. Other communities will keep it prohibited forever. And that's where you're at. The danger in not doing something is that by not doing something, you are presumed to have done something. And that is to say, by not acting or not prohibiting and at the same time not, working on ordinances, you're sort of in a gray area with respect to the legalities. If somebody came to the village tomorrow and said, I have just rented some property on such and such street and I want to put a dispensary in, can you tell me how I go about that? What do we say to that person? We probably say to them, well, do you have a state license? Have you contacted the state? Where are you at? But in reality, because we didn't prohibit it, we're in a position where we need to deal with it, but we haven't dealt with it because we don't have an ordinance in place. Then a lot of communities, I was in Ann Arbor Township last night, I've been in 36 communities on this issue, and I traveled all the way to Washtenaw last night to help Ann Arbor Township deal with this issue, who ended up doing a prohibition with an express reopener after 1 year, that it was mandatory they relook at the issue after the regs are out. But a lot of the questions that come up are, can we just prohibit some? Can we just allow some? Can we say no to 4, allow maybe one of them? Nobody knows the answer because the regulations haven't come out. I tried to send out today a very updated Q&A from April of this year that answers a lot of these questions and poses interesting questions, so I hope you had an opportunity to review that. So where we're at in this community is, I think it's incumbent on the village council to decide and resolve a policy direction, and then I think it's incumbent on the village council to give clear and concise direction to what it wants the planning commission to do for the village council, and then for the planning commission to execute that directive and return something back to the village council for consideration. A lot of people have talked about, well, why don't we do a moratorium while we're doing this? And moratoriums, are allowed legally. They're not as foolproof as the prohibition ordinance. You can generally get away with a moratorium for 6-month increments, but you have to show during the moratorium period that you're actually doing something, that you're engaged at the planning commission level on a direction. You've been charged with something and you're doing it, and then when someone comes to the counter, you can say, we have a moratorium by resolution on these facilities while we're awaiting our planning commission. Let me make it clear again. If you opt out, you can always opt in. If you opt in, you cannot opt out, you will be sued for taking away rights. So prohibition can be repealed and you can go ahead, and if you do a prohibition or a moratorium, either or, the planning commission can be directed to work on things. But if and when you have things in place, getting out of that is going to be legally difficult, so you got to get it right if you're going to do it. With that said, it's my continuing opinion that the first ball in this operation is that of the village council to come to some accord on a policy direction and a directive. And then it's over to the planning commission with clear and concise direction as to what they should be doing. I issued a memo a while ago that talked about some of the built-in setbacks involved in this, and we provided a map this evening that shows a little bit of those radiuses. Now, I just want you to know, I am not the 12-year-old who blew those.
Joe is the 12-year-old.
That would be, that was apparently.
Rather than going from the two maps that were drawn on ArcGIS.
Brian, do you guys want to see what I'm talking about? So, in those, quote, hash marks, I think that Joe is suggesting that would be the built-in area where we cannot do anything.
As well as anything zone residency.
And
The
so-
R and R1.
So the zoning for residential is what color, Joe?
The tannish yellow, I guess it would be, and then the gold, the R1.
Right. So all of those areas are off limits. So really, you're talking about what could we do in the blue and darker blue areas, right?
Well, the Hensley North Corridor, C1 and C1 corridor.
Right. So those are the areas probably under consideration.
Now, Bob, isn't that true if you accept the state standard of
Yes.
something like 1,000-foot radius
Right.
around the school?
And that's all
I
I'm-
understand that's somewhat flexible.
Yes. I do not think you can become more restrictive, but I think you can become less restrictive. But we're just drawing this based on,
I understand.
the recommendations of the state.
The two dots represent the two schools.
Correct.
One at Marketplace, one there.
Right.
So, I don't have a format really for the rest of this meeting. I think, like I said, I just think the village council needs to come to an accord on what we want to do, and we need to translate that over to the planning commission.
So are you saying in the C1 transition, in the C1 core, it's allowed?
Yeah, they only restrict it in areas that are exclusively zoned for residential, which would be the RM and the R1, single family.
And
Those
then
are,
the II?
no, that's industrial. So if it's zoned exclusively residential, it's off limits.
Yeah,
But industrial is
So,
II.
right, so that's not, yes, that's open.
That's open.
Yes, but I'm just saying, in addition to the industrial ones, yeah, the C1, transition C1 core, C2, up in the top there, over by Frosty Boy, those would be anything,
share.
anything in red or pink or blue, purple would be available.
For anybody to come in and do what they want to do.
If there's nothing in place, those would be wide open. You can obviously, as planning commission, exclude areas, like you do other zoning.
So we don't have to address the residential areas that are already off limits if we devise an ordinance.
Even if you didn't, they wouldn't be allowed, or what I take it law is, it wouldn't be allowed in those areas at all.
I think that's fine.
Well, one thing I think to keep in mind is that the act actually gives individual people the right to possess marijuana, but then they can also actually grow
Right.
up to 12
But is
plants.
that one of those licenses though?
No.
See, that's what, this is referred to the license.
Right, exactly.
So without a license, every resident in this community can grow.
Yes,
Yes.
up to 12 plants.
Whether or not this council takes action to prohibit or not.
Yeah,
Right.
all the people who've already been growing can continue.
The prohibition is really to those,
Right.
addressing
Yeah.
those
Facilities.
licenses.
Right, the commercial,
Yep,
yes. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, so, and there's the right to possess a certain amount, there's a right to, and the one thing you cannot zone out of your community is the right of transportation through your community. Nobody can zone out the transportation. So if Joe, you and I got together and bought a bunch of vans and we're gonna transport marijuana, you can't keep us from driving through the village of Oxford. That's one of the uses that you cannot prohibit. So every community has to accept the commerce aspect of the, so you're left with the other categories. You got everything from growing to storefronts.
And a testing facility.
Right. Right.
processor.
Yeah.
Processing, right?
Are there 6 now? They started off with 5 different types, are there 6 now?
Well, that's, yeah, and-
The grower got split into 2, big
Yeah.
grower, little grower or something?
right.
I think there's maybe 3.
Is there 3?
I think there's a class A, B, and C of grower, but it's all considered a grower.
Right.
You're just an A or a B or a C.
It's on line.
Yeah.
I told Bob earlier, when I grew up at the Village of Oxford in planning and zoning, I was always taught that if it's legal, you gotta find a place to allow it. It doesn't have to be at the intersection of Burdick and 24, but if it's a strip club, if it's an adult bookstore, you gotta find the best spot to put it. It doesn't have to be a vacant building. We can zone something that's allowed at an adult bookstore, we don't have to make it vacant if you don't open one. And I think we have to look at these as legal uses, we gotta find the best place for them. I mean, if TKMS decides tomorrow they wanna start hauling dope, they're a local business, I don't wanna tell them they can't do that. And I think we just gotta decide is that we want them to park their vehicles with us.
I gotta say something about the way that we're addressing marijuana.
Okay,
Like-
very casual, you're right.
I mean, we got it, we've all, I think, come from multiple generations where it's all been stigmatized. Like, we're talking about a natural thing that grows in the earth. It's a plant. We're not talking about sex stores in downtown. We have to stop putting it on that level. Like, I think, and it is legal. It is legal. Like, that's the bottom line.
I use the sex store because it's an adult use.
Right.
And this is considered adult use.
Okay, right. But I guess it's just, it hasn't been accepted yet by, I'm not gonna say majority of society, because that's not true either. Because we know that a majority of the voters said yes on proposal 1.
70% in our precinct.
Right. So I think that we're just fighting a cultural stigma that has been put out there. Because typically in the past, when we talk about marijuana, it's been incriminating, because it's been illegal. And coming from a perspective of a politician, which most of us can relate to in the room, nobody wants to say anything pro-marijuana, right? Because usually that was a career ender. But I'm gonna be pro-marijuana on this one. I'm sorry, I am pro-marijuana. I'm pro-recreational, I'm pro-medicinal, I can't say that word. But yeah.
Say medical.
Thank you. And so, I went back and I listened to a lot of things that Mr. Curtis had to say, as far as the cons in opting out. And I agree 100%. I think that it's actually a liability to go ahead and take measures against the voters' wishes and against actually licensing and going through the legal processes of distributing and selling marijuana versus having every Joe Schmo in the village trying to grow their own crop, because what they're gonna do is they're gonna try and grow it inside their homes, because from what I hear, it's a finicky plant. I don't know much about it, but what I hear is it needs a lot of moisture and it needs a lot of light, and what they're gonna do is they're gonna have grow lamps in their basements where it's gonna ruin the homes. And that's gonna, I think that's gonna hurt our property values, that's gonna cause more break-ins. I think there's more liability behind preventing this from inevitably happening than just accepting that this is where we are as a culture. It's our job as government to figure out how these processes work. So it sounds complicated, and it sounds like at the state level they're not ready, but we have to be ready. And I think that it's completely, we have the ability to work this out right now. And that's our job, is to work out how these processes work. So I think rather than kicking the can and opting out and trying to figure out, well, buy us a year and we'll figure out what will be there or be then, why don't we get a jump start on tapping into that resource? Because I think it's going to be an incredible revenue stream for us. And that's where I stand.
I have no problems adopting a 6-month moratorium so that the village council can recommend that the planning commission go through the marijuana legislation and figure out where they best fit into our zoning ordinance.
Honestly, that's my intention as well, and that's what I would like to see. I watched that meeting as well. Jeff, nice to meet you, sorry. I agree with a lot of what you said. I know the rug's been pulled out from under you before. I would like to take the 6 months, 9 months, whatever the recommended time is to make sure we can do this well, make sure it's not destructive entirely. The voters were, it was astounding, like in favor of this. I don't see us being able to ignore that. So I want to make sure we can do it right, we can have the legal issues worked out, see what other precedents are set in other communities. But I would like to make it mandatory for us to revisit this. And I intend to vote yes at that time unless there's,
Bob, would you be kind enough to once again discuss the differences between a prohibition and a moratorium?
Well, they both end up doing the same thing. They both suspend the process while you work on things. The ordinance prohibition is just legally safer than the moratorium. Moratoriums have often been challenged legally as being inappropriate because they give the impression you're just buying time and you're not really doing anything.
Right.
I would only recommend a moratorium if you're going to give clear direction and you're going to react to that direction and do something.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just do a moratorium to kick the can. So then you need to do the moratorium every 6 months. I would not recommend going past 1 year. But that's about the amount of time you need anyways, because we're either going to get this guidance in June. I'm pretty solid ground the governor is going to have it out in June. But if not, it's required in the statute that it's out by 1 year from December 6th of last year. So it has to be out by this December. I think the governor's goal is to get it out earlier. Moratorium, not as legally safe, but effective. And they both do the same thing. They give you time to get direction from this body to do something.
Thank you. I know that when we talked about this in the commission, I sensed personally that there was a great deal of support for this. And that we are a body that provides guidance and recommendations to the council, and that it's our intention to follow the law. And if the law, or at least if the voters say that this is going to be a legal situation for us in this state, then we have to be accommodating to that. And so I don't think that there would be, I personally don't think that there would be any hesitation from the commission to be able to draft ordinances for you to cover any and all of these categories that are available to us, the 5 or 6 that Mo had referred to. I think that probably the overriding thing that came out as we discussed this in our meetings, and we've discussed this numerous times over the last couple of years actually, was that right now, because of the way Bob had introduced this, we're wide open. And anybody could walk in to talk to Joe tomorrow and say, here's my stuff. I want to open up a storefront right here on 24. And Joe would have to pretty much accommodate them. We don't have any guidance for somebody who wants to come do business in our community in this regard. And I think that none of us on the planning commission want to see that happen. This is something that I think the public would demand that we provide strict oversight and guidance for, and that it not be run roughshod over the community, but done in a professional and appropriate way. And so I know that's part of the rationale for us wanting to do this meeting with you, Joe, was that we wanted to get a clear sense of guidance from the council as to what you wanted us to do, and then pull the trigger and say go. And I personally, I'm very much in favor of a limited prohibition of this in this village until we can put the proper measures in place that give Joe and the rest of the authorities in this town the kind of guidance that would be required to be able to direct this in a proper way. So I hope that that's what we can come out of this meeting tonight with, is one, a clear understanding of what the council's wishes are, and that perhaps we could put some type of measure in place that would temporarily prohibit any type of business activity like that in this village until we can put the pieces in place to regulate it.
So, go ahead, Mr. Miller.
Sure. I've heard from quite a few people that, it passed as a ballot question by a huge majority. I'm not sure how huge the majority is. If that were all, then it would make my job very simple. All I'd have to do is read the ballot language, look at the vote count.
We have that somewhere.
And then yeah, but it's not that simple.
Okay.
And then act accordingly as council member. I believe that I was elected to council for the purposes of making decisions and voting on things. And so I believe in thinking before I make decisions, and I believe in thinking before I vote. And right now, having thought about it quite a bit, I'm intending to vote to shut down everything. At least, as people have been saying, temporarily, at least. But without a time span attached. I would prefer to vote, shut it down. And then, as Mr. Davis has said, at some future time, we can always reconsider that. But shutting down now and opening up later is a lot easier, according to an attorney, than doing it in the reverse sequence.
Well, what I said is you can't do it in reverse. I just given you the law. You can shut and repeal and do it, but you can't do it and then take it away.
I see.
Yeah, without a takings
And
challenge.
I am fully aware that decisions that I take now, not necessarily this meeting, but now in the sense of like April, decisions that I take now may have a bearing on whether I get reelected in 2020. And so be it. I was elected to help in setting policy, and the way you do that is by casting votes.
Can I make something clear? I think the voters approve recreational use, not the sale of, so I think that's what, we're not taking away from the voters the use of recreational use of marijuana. We're talking about whether we want to sell this in our town.
Well, and I'll say to Mr. Bailey's statement, although thinking is a huge part of the process of being an elected official, we're actually elected to represent our constituents and their best interests. So if that's a decision you choose to make, that does go against the majority of what people voted on. However, to Chief's point, you're right. We don't know if that's what they're actually indicating. They might want to smoke it, they might not want it in the town, but we don't know that unless we have a town hall. And I've yet to see anything get put on the calendar, because that was brought up multiple times at council, that we wanted to have a town hall about this. So I think before we make any decisions, I would like to see that set in the books. But also, I also want to know what the anxiety is with this time frame, because from what I've researched and what I've read here is that even if somebody walked in to Joe's office tomorrow, we can't issue any licensing until the state does.
Right.
So what are we worried about?
Some communities have, there's already been some lawsuits, and the lawsuits center on if somebody came in, they may want to be considered first in line for when you are ready. And are we allowed to hold their request as being the first request, the second request, the third request? There's some, you know, if you read this thing, and that's why I wanted it, you guys read, there's so many unanswered questions in here. You say, well, we're not sure, the law's not clear on this, the law's not clear on this. So the safest thing is to do either a moratorium or a prohibition and ask you to act. While they're acting, you can hold that town to help them formulate the opinions of the community at the planning commission level. So, you know, just so you're protected. I mean, there's like you said, there's no rush on it, but you want to have something in place while you do what you're going to do.
I agree.
So without using moratorium and prohibition, can we just say, we'd like the council just to opt out of the
No.
act now, or you have to use the...
And the law says you can't even do it by resolution, it has to be an ordinance.
I just think that I think it sets a precedence, because it says that we're willing to go against the wish of the voters without knowing, we'll take that risk in order for our own safety, which I don't want to be a liability, but again, I think that it sets a tone, and it's not the one that I would like to echo.
The one we did last night was, they did a prohibition with a mandatory reopener. And I've seen a lot of communities doing that, where the last provision of the ordinance is, this ordinance shall be revisited on this date for possible repeal and further action on the ordinances. Kind of the same concept as the moratorium.
I'd be happy to look at our charter, looking for the wording, go against the wishes of the voters. I suspect I won't find it. Whereas I'm quite certain that I will find in our charter the statement that elected members of council are expected to set policy. Or words similar to that. Nothing about going against the wishes of the voters, I don't believe.
So many of you make a lot of fair points on both sides of the argument. I think we have an opportunity as a community, we have an opportunity as a state, and we have an opportunity to regulate or not regulate. That's as simple as that. It's going to be in our community whether we want it here or not. And so we have to decide how we're going to regulate it, if we're going to regulate it. And in doing so, that does open up the opportunity for potential revenue. It does open up the opportunity for potential risk. Risk for our police officers, risk for our citizens. So we need to weigh those options. And I have said from day one, when we started talking about this, literally at our first meeting as council, because in the grand scheme of things and in the history of Michigan, it is now legal on our watch, and we have to figure this out. And I've always maintained that we do not have enough information. And I've always maintained that our planning commission, our DDA, our staff, those are our entities, our advisors, if you will, to help set some of these policies. And so if it takes a moratorium or an action of prohibition to set that ball in motion, to get those questions answered, I mean, I can look on this map and great, that's what the state law is telling us, but the planning commission, the Mario, the planning consultant, you folks have an intimate knowledge of the zoning of this community. You know where things work, you know where things don't work. And I am interested as a council person to hear those thoughts and to use those recommendations to craft sensible legislation to enact the wishes of our community.
I want to ask Mario, our planner, if you have much experience up to now with communities that have in fact developed ordinances and what those ordinances are like.
I do, and in addition to myself, every other planner at the firm, again, has had to deal with this in their own municipality, because everyone is facing this question. And each one has done it a little bit differently, mainly for the reasons that were brought up, is the fact that this is evolving very quickly over time. And one of the issues in the past with medical marijuana was that the Bureau of Medical Marijuana Regulation would every month come out with a new policy and a new change because they were facing issues. They were facing issues that some communities wanted to allow them, and some communities like Detroit had to deal with all these established community facilities in their community, and they wanted to minimize the quantity. Detroit had successfully reduced the quantity to something that they feel is manageable, at least for medical marijuana. So we do have a lot of different experience from a lot of different places. Now, one thing I will say with that is that, we can try and craft something that'll work, that we feel works best for the village. However, in the end, it's not necessary to say that we're going to hit it out of the ballpark in the first try. I have some communities that have come back and revisited the medical marijuana several times because of either a change in state policy or because of their desires to say, oh, wait a minute, now we want to do this, that, and the other thing. And I just wanted to provide you with some additional information just in terms of your conversation. A couple things about the latest statute, the Michigan Regulation and Taxation of Marijuana Act. It does limit at least to my reading, as a non-attorney, it does limit the state excise tax to 10%, and I believe that is a state tax, so it goes to the state. So any money that goes from the recreational facilities to the local municipality, I would think it was then dictated by the current policy for government sharing. So, and as we know, the state policy in the past has severely limited the sharing from the state down to local municipalities. So there's that. It does allow local municipalities to charge an annual fee for administration and they say enforcement. And that's limited to $5,000. So if you, at the most, a facility can only be charged an annual licensing fee of $5,000 each.
You have to support that, you have to be able to
Right.
prove that expense.
Exactly, because it's administration, enforcement, and I think a couple other tasks, but you need to be able to say that you're gonna be spending $5,000 on these,
Get reimbursed, kind of like liquor control.
basically, yeah. Some other things in terms of certain protections we currently have, when it comes to individuals in their homes, they could be stringing up a lot of different lights and a lot of different things. The protections we would have now mainly are electrical code enforcement. And technically, people should be coming in and getting permits for that if they're going to have a large bank. I don't know what wattage or whatever, but technically that's available to us right now. And then, while from my perspective, from the planning and zoning standpoint, the use right now is not listed anywhere in any zoning district. So that, to me, that would mean it's a thin layer of policy that could be called upon to say that if someone comes in tomorrow and asks Joe for putting a dispensary right on Washington, on 24, that he could say, well, technically it's not listed anywhere, so I can't issue a permit. In addition, he'll say, you don't even have a license from the state yet. But technically, that's one layer of protection. It's not a permitted use anywhere. And while Mo is correct, there are definitely some uses that have been deemed as constitutionally protected, such as adult businesses.
So you
it's
can
also
say that again, please?
So if someone came in and said, I wanted to do a dispensary, we could say, you don't have it listed anywhere as a permitted or a special use.
Okay.
So it's not allowed currently. It's a thin layer of protection because eventually at some point, other municipalities might be taking that as a tool, and then they probably will eventually get challenged on that. But my argument from a planning experience is the fact that, we don't list like a nuclear power plant anywhere as within a permitted or special use. So while it's not listed, we still, chances are, we have the ability to permit that in the village. We don't necessarily have to say whether you do or do not, whether you are permitted or special use for a nuclear power plant. Now, I'm not an attorney, so I don't know if that argument would hold water.
So Mario, did you say that there were some uses that were constitutionally allowed?
Well, basically,
That's kind of where I wanted to hear, that's what I didn't catch.
just as a frame of reference, adult uses have been deemed by the Supreme Court previous decisions as a form of expression. So they are protected by the Constitution. And so therefore, you do have to list them to be allowed somewhere within your community. Now, Mo's right too, that, you don't have to hold to the vagaries of the real estate market. If we have our protections and our radiuses and our zoning districts, and if the one place is a established business, that's not our fault. Then it's up to the market, and that person wants to establish an adult use that badly, then they can go negotiate a price and deal with the real estate. But to my knowledge, those are the main adult uses are the ones that are currently constitutionally protected. That doesn't mean that someone right now doesn't think that their use to utilize marijuana is could be equally challenged in court and won.
That's my question, Mr. Davis, related to that constitutional use is, what opinion do you have or have other communities come across in terms of the fact that at the federal level, this is still an illegal substance? And how does that potentially impact any decisions that we make?
There's a couple issues on that. If you look down at your map, you see the blue water. right? You have water in your community, thank God it's not a federal waterway, because there's a lot of literature on federal waterways right now that the US government, through the US Coast Guard, my alma mater, is going to strictly enforce the use of marijuana on federal waterways, so you don't have that issue. That's good. The second issue is with the banking. The federal government, through FDIC insured banks, has not, and I think Barr is coming around on this. As soon as he's done with the Mueller report, this is, he's going to get on this. But right now, the Justice Department has not freed up the ability of FDIC banks to receive money from these enterprises. So when you go to these public forums, you get police officers who stand up and say that this then translates into some sort of a cash-heavy business, which frightens law enforcement to some degree, because with cash heavy comes, other elements that they grow concerned about. And they don't really give you enough money to offset having another officer because you're having these facilities. So the tension between the federal law and the state law is still there, but it's not being enforced. I think our Justice Department has a policy in effect right now that, aside from the banking issue, they're not going to come to Michigan and haul Mr. Curtis away because he has his legal amount of marijuana in his back pocket. The banking is still the largest. I just picked you out of the crowd. You look like a reaching back pocket. So, talk to you guys. I'll find the gun and the marijuana. So the tension between the federal law is still there, because it's federally still a class narcotic. It's still on the list for whatever reason. We all have our feelings on marijuana and its benefits, but it's still a high-class narcotic for law enforcement purposes. Chief, that's the tension that's still out there.
Yeah, you summed it up perfectly.
So that's, if you go back to the planner's very accurate comments, this hasn't risen to a level of a protected right in terms of the litigation that's evolved with other adult expressive uses. This hasn't risen to that. But on the other hand, we, as a state, we made it legal, right? And so that goes to most point. If we made Dairy Queens legal, we should have a place for a Dairy Queen.
Oh, that's at 47 Dayton.
No, but that's your concept, right? That's your
If it's legal, we should allow it somewhere.
And herein lies the tension. The real tension that these two bodies, that you need to get, we're airing out some of our independent feelings here, but the real tension is that I'm giving you this legal advice. Do something and have something in place while they do something to address your policy.
Go ahead, Mr.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask a question about the 800-pound gorilla over in the corner, which would be the folks in Washington, D.C. And the question is there any hint of anybody has about possible enforcement of the federal law? And is it that the feds won't touch Michigan with a 10-foot pole? And if so, why not?
The feds, the policy right now is they're not enforcing it. Doesn't mean they won't change that policy. Doesn't mean they can't change that
Well,
policy.
are they afraid of Michigan?
No, they're not enforcing in Colorado. They're not enforcing in any state.
Washington.
Yeah, there's a number of states that have taken this action.
States that are.
Yeah, they're not
For years.
They're not going into states whose voters approved the legalization of marijuana and going around that directive and arresting people for the possession of marijuana. They're not doing it. Now, there are still active federal agents working on large shipments of marijuana illegally across our borders. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're still working on that, but they're not going into states where recreational marijuana use has been made legal and busting those people for the legal use in their own state. They're not doing it. They are enforcing the banking laws, though.
Justin, you
Mario, the communities that you have worked with or your firm has worked with in coming up with regulations, what is a typical time frame that it takes with those communities come up with a time frame?
I've had some communities that, when they were just dealing with medical marijuana, they kind of went round and round and round, and it took them over a year and a half. But I've had others that come up with things within less than 6 months, because they had the benefit of taking some time and dealing with it, and the fact that other communities have had experience.
Yeah, Mario,
So-
do you have communities who have enacted recreational ordinances?
I know of at least one that is, it's either, they have a first draft of their ordinance, I'm not sure if they've adopted it yet. It's not one of my communities, but it is another
But
community.
you don't have any you have no, what do we call that, the planner ordinance bank?
Oh,
Because we'd be blazing a little bit here, right?
Yeah.
We'd be
a
blazing
little bit, but we have, like I said, we have the benefit of everyone else in the firm, and I can definitely
Yeah.
utilize their expertise for that.
So we can get some things
Absolutely.
already in place. I found a couple on my own that have already been in place. So
And-
there's stuff to draw on.
And you know, in the end, because as we mentioned, at the state level, it's become a legal activity. So in the end, from a planning standpoint, we would attempt to answer questions based on, just like any other type of special use, if you will. Number one, what type of review process do we want to have? Number two, locationally, where would we want to have this be placed? In which district? If there's, in addition to protections from schools, other communities have also had protections for parks or other types of protected uses we feel it wouldn't be good to have them in close proximity to. The size of these individual facilities, hours of operation. If we deem it a special use, we could also deem it a permitted use. And so when it comes time, with direction from council, we can have discussions at the planning commission where we just knock down those questions one at a time.
So you do time, place, and manner.
Yeah.
I mean, you're gonna go through an ordinance scheme, time, place, and manner.
Yeah, basically. I mean, sometimes, and process, a approval process.
You're gonna have to have an application process, you're gonna have to have a review criteria.
Right.
The state is recommending initially that if somebody was approved for medical marijuana, they kind of get a little bit of a pass on this review because they've already been through the scrutiny. So you could adopt, things of that nature in your review process.
Does the current accessory shop downtown have any first dibs, so to speak?
No, I don't think so.
They're actually, because they're multi-state, they have no intention of jumping into this pool. Because then they're gonna have to deal with the feds and no one's dealing with the feds.
Interstate commerce.
Yeah.
Is there any existing medical marijuana related, so that wouldn't apply as of right now? Okay.
There's one under construction in Inkster, a large one. A growing facility.
Well,
there's
two
in
Orion Township.
The facilities are there to allow to have, for growing specifically. But I don't think there's any businesses specifically in there, they're just creating facilities for it, to accommodate someone to occupy that space. Could be wrong, but.
I'm letting you have your opinion because I don't know this. I
Okay.
talked to Chris Barnett yesterday. One of the reasons they allowed the marijuana growers was the number of fires in residential areas due to the illegal hookups of electricity, which you'll never stop. Secondly, at least you can get a quality product out of the inspected grow operations. It's in one area, you don't know what's going on inside the building other than it's a giant building. And they maintain that through that avenue. To me, I look at this map and I see every one of those brown areas as having 12 plants. So why are we wasting our time talking about an ordinance to allow people to sell it? Because I can buy it right now. I don't need to pay the tax and have the tax money come to you, I could probably walk through this town, right, Michael? Somewhere in this town, I could probably buy marijuana. But in December, you can have 3,000 residents that can grow up to 12 plants in all that brown area. But the only place you won't have is areas that you really want to have it regulated.
Income producing properties.
Thank you.
Yes.
So you don't have properties in this town available for marijuana growers because there aren't properties in town for the manufacturing and technology communities that want to come here. There is no buildings available for them. Now, you notice that the last commercial piece of property that was of any value was sold to Noda. And that was the last one that was of any value for technical or research or development type projects or a marijuana grow. Everything else is taken up.
Yeah, you need quite a bit of space down.
It's, the one is 500,000 square feet of a grow area. I mean,
I think Mrs. Griffiths.
Yeah, I just want to say, from the point of the planning commission, I agree with Mr. Davis that if the council wants to not opt out, or I mean, even if they do, whatever the wishes of the council are, if we're going to do it, we need to do it right. And that really resonated with me. And especially when you read the Michigan Municipal League Q&A, there's just so much that's unclear. So that's why I would recommend the council to opt out, and we can really get our ducks in a row. We can do all the work. It's going to take an enormous effort, I can tell you, just drafting an ordinance from scratch, which sounds like maybe, I don't know, maybe it has been done for this law. I'm sure it has been done in the state, but we don't even know that. So we really are blazing a trail,
There's a couple out there, but very few have been passed. We have some precedent to draw on, but like you said, you'd have to go around your office and find some. There's not a lot.
Right, and you don't know how, I mean, we don't have this final regulations. And so I think that is really important for us to be able to put together something that's going to work for our community and be able to do it right. You know, as Mario pointed out too, it may not be right on the first try, but at least get as close as possible because it is going to impact the community once we start getting the applications. If council decides, you know, to opt back in at this point. But I just think we need that time and we need to know what the budget's going to be for Mario to assist us. I mean, how much work are the planning commissioners going to be doing? How much money is going to be budgeted for Mario's assistance on this? Because I think it's just going to take, my concern is the amount of time. So that's why I would recommend, if I'm in a place to make this recommendation, I would recommend the council to do the opt-out. It's the most legally sound way of being able to have us produce the best product that we can for an ordinance.
The primary obstacle that the state hasn't clarified yet is can I do 3 and can the other 2?
That was going to be my
Or
question.
can I do 4 and can 2? They just haven't answered that yet. But I tell you, I think the governor is going to answer these questions sooner than later.
So there are 5 and or 6 defined uses.
There's really 6.
And so if you open the door and create ordinance for this, are you required to accept all 6 or can you do a smorgasbord or à la carte?
I don't know.
We don't have an answer to that yet.
That's one of the things they're going to clarify.
You might do the logical thing and make sure that you have an ordinance.
Like, let's say some communities say, you know, we don't want a storefront, we don't want retail, but in our certain areas, we'd love to have growers and processors and just have those businesses. Can they do that? I don't know. The state doesn't know yet because with allowing growing and processing, you may have to allow retail.
So with the ballot
I'm hoping you don't.
With the ballot that we voted on in November, because Chief brought up a really good point. I don't frankly remember exactly what the terminology of the ballot was. So did we vote on allowing recreational use and or everything that goes along with that, all these 6 uses?
You voted on the
That's the point that I
legalization.
kind of heard you say, is that everybody voted on recreational use, and so now recreation is legal, but now there's this other aspect of, well, yeah, but I want to be a grower,
Where do you
I want to
get
be a
it?
transporter, I want to have a storefront. Did we vote on all of this too as well?
You voted on the legalization of recreational marijuana. You didn't vote on where it should be sold or how it should be sold.
Right.
But with legalization of recreational marijuana.
Comes all of that.
You gotta,
Otherwise,
Yes.
you gotta be able to hit it somewhere.
Right.
Do you know how different our recreational is compared to, let's say, Colorado or California or Washington? How different is our recreational?
And that's where you find your draft ordinances.
Right.
Well, yeah,
Is that coming from the
that's one of
state?
your, that's one of your Q&A. It says, don't look to other states. It's not a good idea to follow another state's process because our Michigan underlying statutory authority is going to end up different.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we can draw upon them,
And I'm sure,
but very similar.
yes, they say that, but usually,
They're very similar.
it's probably gonna be very similar.
Very
And I was curious if there was anything.
The use categories are very similar, the process of getting an ordinance in place, the process of screening people, the amount of fee you can charge is very similar.
Okay. Maureen?
I'll make a motion. If anybody's ready for that.
Okay, so let's just talk about procedure here. This is a motion on the village council
This would be for the village council.
side of the meeting.
Yes, Jack, did you have more that you wanted to discuss before we take that step, or before we take that step?
They could take that step.
I'm gonna try to do it all in one motion. If you guys need me to stop so we can break up into multiples, that's fine. But I'd like to make a motion to place moratorium on recreational marijuana legislation in the village of Oxford. So we can task the planning commission to begin drafting an ordinance regarding legalized marijuana and for the village manager to plan a town hall meeting regarding the same topic within, and I guess this is my question, do we want the planning commission to discuss it first or at the town hall? How about within 45 days? That'll give us 2 planning commissions at least under our belts, and then the town hall, depending on when he plans it.
Okay, so all you need in that motion is a duration for the moratorium.
A 6 month. We can always go for the extension if we need an extension.
So if the language comes out in June, does that give the planning commission enough time to do this well and properly?
For 6 months.
Are we having discussions? There shouldn't be any
No, I'm
discussion.
sorry.
Let's just flush out the motion.
Flush out the motion.
So the moratorium is not on the legislation. The moratorium is on the 6 facility uses. You would like to have a 6-month moratorium on the 6 categories, 7 categories of usages.
Okay.
For 6 months, while we instruct our planning commission to develop an ordinance scheme for those uses with a public forum.
With the town hall meeting.
Within 45 days.
Yes.
Okay, I understand. your motion.
Is that enough? Should we split it into multiple?
No, that's
Okay.
fine. I just want, you said a moratorium on the
I
legislation.
know.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification, because that's what I heard.
Yeah.
Maureen, question for you. Now, did you really mean a moratorium?
I really need a moratorium.
So you would like to go with moratorium as opposed to prohibition?
Absolutely.
Since we have a motion on the floor, it's still
Let's get a
being
second and we'll
massaged.
talk about it.
Let's get a second, and support, and then we can have discussion.
Who's
So there's a motion that has been proposed by Mrs. Helmuth. Is there support? I'll support for discussion. Support. There's a motion to support for the placing of a moratorium. It's open for discussion.
Yeah, I think that moratorium is a suitable word to use. And the reason why I think so is that I don't think that the village of Oxford is just going to sit on their hands during the moratorium period. I think progress will be made. First of all, of course, at planning commission, and then later on, probably at the village council level. So I think that's a great word to use, even though other communities may have used it and got burned.
So just using the word moratorium legally bind us to eventually do this?
No.
No.
Okay.
But we have to be working towards something.
The moratorium is allowed to stop, like, I think, I'm trying to think of one, we did them on outdoor cafes, or was that, we did a moratorium on something.
Oh, we did.
So basically, you're suspending the allowed use while you figure out how to do the use, if you do. So you say the moratorium is on the use. We're not allowing the use during the 6 months while Mario and the planning commission research and prepare and deliver ordinances back to the village council for review and consideration. And you've added the proviso that there would be a public town hall forum on this matter during or within the first 45 days. So you're not guaranteeing that you're going to do this, but you're guaranteeing it's not going to happen for 6 months while you study it. It's the same effect as the ordinance prohibition, only it's not an ordinance prohibition, which I continue to believe is safer.
All right, Bob, now how does a moratorium expire?
By time.
And it'll expire automatically in 6 months?
Yes, and
And
somebody
can it be
who,
renewed?
yes, for another 6 months.
Okay.
Somebody who challenges a moratorium will have the right to analyze, and Mario probably knows this, they'll have the right to analyze what did the planning commission do during that 6 months, and was it enough? If you have a prohibition, that analysis is out the window.
Yeah.
A moratorium is subject to a factual challenge on what you did. That's the only weakness of the moratorium process.
A question about the moratorium, a publicity question. And I'm not a publicity expert, but the question is, let's suppose we pass Maureen's motion and then the moratorium goes into effect. Does that have much effect on the number of proprietors who'll be on our door saying, hey, I need paperwork for my marijuana store, or whatever it might be. Are they gonna notice?
Jay?
You know what it means? It means that this planning commission is going to be spending village money to put together an ordinance, whether you guys adopt it or not.
Correct.
They're going to be spending thousands of dollars and needing hours writing an ordinance that the village council may not adopt.
Correct.
Agreed. I understand.
Okay, I just have a little understanding of the financial stability of the village. Understand that you're just around the corner paving your first road in 25 years. And now you're gonna make people go to work, do work and spend money and not have the end use.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I asked the question was I understood the reason why, one of the reasons why we're sitting here in this room today is because of the possibility that in a couple of weeks, proprietors will be pounding on the door saying, we need our paperwork to be done. And
They already are.
if this motion doesn't affect those people, then that's one thing. If it does discourage them from coming around and harassing us, that's something else.
Well, I can tell you from our experience, I did have one community that enacted a moratorium, and what happened was people would still call, people would still knock on the door, but the answer that the administration could provide them was, the community now has a moratorium, it's for this month, and it expires at this time. At this point in time, you're not even taking any applications. And from a procedural standpoint, I think that's an effective method for the moratorium, because that way you don't have these people asking, can I be put on a wait list? Can I wait on you? I can do this. We can say, there's a moratorium because we are doing our due diligence and we are working towards something. Now, what comes at the end of that is going to end up in the commission's hands, the council's hands. But, procedurally and administratively, it takes a little bit of load off in terms of having a definitive answer for applicants for at least a 6-month period. Because that way you can say, check back in 6 months.
And I don't know what here, I just want to clarify, I think part of the question that Allison may have asked is, you said before that in order to prohibit, you can't do it by resolution, it has to be ordinance.
Yes.
So does the moratorium give them the same opt-out option down the road? If 6 months down the road, they find out what the state is just unacceptable, but now we've already given the issues are out there, do they then have the same ability to then pass prohibition
Yes.
Because I thought that's kind of what you had asked, and I want to be sure.
I think what she was asking in reverse was, if we do the moratorium, are we guaranteeing we have to do something? And the answer to that is no.
Because the planning commission could go through all their meetings and come back and say, you know what, village council, we've decided there's no place for this.
Or there's no suitable place, or
Right.
there's no rational way to do it.
Right.
But from my understanding, planning commission cannot do that without an action from the council, correct?
They can't do the analysis without action from the council. They can't sua sponte, just undertake this effort without you, the village council, directing them, authorizing meetings, authorizing money, authorizing Mario, authorizing the analysis. You have to tell them to do it, or they cannot unilaterally undertake that action.
Thank you.
I have a question about the duration of what happens during the moratorium. Say, 4 months into the moratorium, we decide to go wide open. Are there any complications? Versus 4 months into the moratorium, we decide to shut down permanently and forever. Are there any complications there? In other words, do we have to wait out the 6 months before we do anything?
No, you don't have to. As soon as if you get into a moratorium, you better have in the same motion direction, and you better be telling the planning commission what you want them to do, and the planning commission better start it. Because if I come in, I'm the person at the counter, and Mario gives that answer, well, we have a moratorium in effect, and I go behind the scenes and I find out you have a moratorium in effect and you're not doing squat, you're done. You're gonna get sued.
I thought that there might be a requirement that any action you take, whether it's thumbs up or thumbs down, has to wait until the last day of the moratorium.
You can be done in a month.
Could be done in a month, okay.
And you can extend your moratorium, in my opinion, one time for another 6 months.
Okay.
It sounds as though that regardless if we have a moratorium or not, we still have to eventually, it sounds like, spend the money to do it. So it's either you do it or you don't do it, right? If you put a moratorium on it, we're spending the money to do it, so we might as well do it anyways, or don't do it at all. Prohibit or allow it to go on. The moratorium would be more or less just to get our ducks in a row to make it feasible to happen. So.
That's correct.
The good news is you can use the licensing fee of $5,000 to cover the cost that it took for the planning commission to draft up that ordinance.
You can.
Once we get everything going, but I mean, the only redundance there would be if we rejected it after it's all said and done, which I would never do personally, but.
But
I think-
we can't pre-vote on approving it. You know, that would,
I wasn't going to vote officially.
only when you reach higher levels of government.
And one other thing, I want to make sure we wrote down that someone in this room said I was right today. Mark it on your calendars.
Believe me, that was well noted.
Okay.
You
That's
know,
not
It's in the minutes already.
but I came from Mario, so it's.
Jerry, please note that in the minutes if you will, please.
But he's leaving with Mario.
It wasn't tomorrow.
If there- All right, so discussion has meandered to jovial banter, but there is a motion on the table with support. So if there's still discussion, that's great, but
Sorry, may I ask
Yeah.
one more question? From the planning commission's view, does it make sense to start working on this now or wait until the states, if the states come out in June, should we start now or should we wait 2 months?
if we're putting in a moratorium, we should start immediately.
Yes, thank you.
Then why even have a moratorium? Why don't you just start working on it?
So that in June, if we don't have our ducks in a row and people do have their licenses from the state, we still have control over it.
You'd still have the moratorium in place, and you don't have to accept those applications
Yeah.
until you're ready, and it sounds like your goal is to get ahead of this. If we're gonna have it, let's at least get ahead of it with an ordinance. And the moratorium gives you the time to do that, without,
Yeah, I'm not trying to be reckless, but I'm trying to save them from FOIA too. Like if we're already gonna be working on it.
So maybe a question is, and can you opt in, or either can you vote to opt in or opt out now and then vote on a moratorium if you opt in? Does that make a little more
you
sense?
don't vote to opt in, you only vote to opt out.
Okay, so
we're already in.
By doing a moratorium and studying the issue, you're pronouncing that you're in.
So maybe what I'm asking is if you guys decide if you're opting out, and if you don't opt out, that automatically means that
You're somehow in.
you're in. So only the moratorium would be, let's say, we're only voting on moratorium just so that we can move forward and actually put the ordinances in place.
Right.
You use the moratorium, it's like a shield. Somebody comes to the counter and wants to get involved in this, you have a shield that says, we're under a moratorium, come back, now, that's all it has.
Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot. Do you think there is a chance that you could look at this and ever say there's absolutely nowhere for it?
No,
Okay.
no, I don't.
I just want to say that I think this Ken's question leads to, because you're asking, so if, say the governor's initiative to get the final regulations out in June comes true, so we have a couple months before that happens. We need to start working on this right away. So obviously we would start working on this if council's current motion passes. We'd start working on it right away, and then we'd have to look at when the final regulations come out to see if
Tweak it.
we're on track.
You'd end up tweaking it a little.
So that's okay if the regulations come out in June, which sounds like they will, but if they come out in December, we're gonna have a little more trouble getting something done on time that's consistent with.
But you can still do your moratorium extension and meet your December. For sure, you're gonna have these answers.
Right.
December 6th.
I just know how long it takes to draft an ordinance, especially from scratch, and so my concern is still.
Without a lot of precedent. It's not like sometimes you're reinventing the wheel.
Right.
Jack is anxious to talk.
Oh, that is,
Go ahead, Jack.
don't want to forget my
It's
train of
easy to
thought.
read you. You're pretty easy to read.
Go ahead,
I
Jack.
forgot what I was going to say. With a moratorium, you're giving direction, if it passes, you're giving direction to the planning commission to write ordinances for all 6 of the marijuana usages.
I think at this juncture, you have to go with all 6 because the law has not said you can exclude some of them.
Okay, thank you. Number 2, can you opt out after we come up to you with ordinances for all 6?
Yes.
So 6 people, 7 people will be working on ordinances in the planner. And if somebody changes their mind later on and opts out, and says, oh, we want to opt out, just think of that before you vote yes for a moratorium.
Well, I think I hate predicting things, but let's say you work and you come up with what you believe as a planning commission are valid ordinances. But for whatever reason, the council doesn't view those ordinances as rational or logical for other reasons at the time.
Right.
They can reject your ordinances and make a motion to adopt an ordinance opting out entirely because they just don't like the way the ordinance is panned out. And that's happened before. I mean, Mario, you've been in situations where you spent a year writing an ordinance, and ultimately the legislative body says, we don't want to do it. Right? You've been down that road, I've been down that road.
Yes.
So that's not unusual, but and that's why we started with the roles here. Your role is to present something. Your role is to act or not act on it. That's it. Or they can remand it back to you and say, we like 90% of it, we don't like the 10% that Jack wrote, so could somebody else fix that area of the ordinance and then we'll approve it, right?
Yeah.
So Bob, we have a motion on the table right now, council does, and it talks directly to the moratorium, but that's not quite enough. I need another part of this that provides a clear direction to us as to what to cover.
I think the motion,
Does that come
I
as?
thought the motion included that, did it not?
I certainly tried to.
Did you hear that?
what I heard was, there was a motion to put a 6-month moratorium on these types of uses in the village, send the matter to the planning commission for the planning commission to develop an ordinance scheme for the uses, including time, place, and manner, if that's fair. And within the first 45 days from today, for the planning commission to organize, for the village to hold a town, what do you call it?
Town hall.
Town hall forum meeting on this issue.
Okay.
And there'll be public hearings all over the place with this what's actually written. If we decide to go, there's gonna be public hearings.
We'll explain that at the town hall. We'll say there'll be opportunities. There's nothing to review at this town hall meeting, but there will be.
Yeah. I believe that the issue of the possibility of planning commission spending a lot of time working on it, and then the council saying, no, we've decided not to. I don't think that's inherent in marijuana. It could be parking. The planning commission spends a lot of time working on parking, and then the council says, well, no, we decided not to.
No, that happens all the time.
That happens all the time. That's the point I want
I'm
to
sure
make.
Mario can give
That's
me lots
nothing
of
to do with
examples.
marijuana. It could happen on any issue.
Right. So we have a motion and a second, I believe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Got a comment from the public?
Well, I know I'm out of turn, okay, but if you'll entertain me for just a moment.
Stand up, Brian.
I have been reading your counselor all evening, and I'm getting the sense that he is telling you that if you opt out, you can opt back in later. And I'm also hearing a couple key elements here, that he's telling you if you opt out, you don't have an opportunity for litigation during that process. I'm also hearing a couple other things. If you opt out, you can wait until you're released from the state to find out what those regulations are. You're not spending any money in the process, because as it is right now, you're going to be doing a moratorium, you're going to be spending money, not knowing what's coming down the path, and you're also putting your attorney, who has to uphold you in court, in a very awkward situation because of you put a moratorium in place. So I don't know why you're going down this path, but there's two paths. And if you're, what you also have to understand is if you're opting out, you're not opting out indefinitely. And so I don't know why you're doing a moratorium and why you're not opting out. You would be saving the village a lot of money. You're waiting for deadlines that are going to bring things that are unknown into the picture. And your lawyer's going to be a lot more comfortable when he goes home at night.
Is that a fair assessment?
Did I go home at night?
No.
I'll say that. That's, you know, I've written several memos on this, and I have recommended routinely that we not say no to these uses, but that we opt out while we study how to implement these uses.
But opting out is saying no.
Opting out is saying no until we repeal because we have more knowledge later. But optically, I see what you're saying, that it appears to be a no. Right.
But it's a safe way to analyze what you're doing. and go through the
Yeah, and
process.
that's, Mario, would you agree that that's the route a lot of communities have taken?
There has been, yes. They've opted to basically let others attempt it, and others have attempted it because they believe that either what they can perceive as a direction from the voting public, or whether they feel that it's something that's a right that should be provided, and then they also, mainly because they want to try and get in front of the situation and have ordinances in place. And so they've gone through the path. And, you know, yeah, so,
It's,
yeah, sorry, we're.
I think if we wanted to get in front of it, we should have had this discussion in December, but we could have had that drafted by now.
Possibly, but I think one key thing about the 6-month moratorium is the fact that we were saying that if we needed to, we could get another 6 months at the end of that. So, but regardless of that, whether you have something that you deal with at the end of the 6 months or 12 months or whatever, one thing I want to emphasize is that ordinances really should be a dynamic document. They don't have to be set in stone. You might feel like if you would readdress something, then you're, why are we spending more time on this? But because things evolve over time, especially this with such a new type of use, it's not, you shouldn't feel that if you're going to be addressing this multiple times, that's going to be a negative issue. It's just the fact that of dealing with something new.
no ordinance.
Yeah. So it's not.
So we could amend the motion to say prohibition, and we could still instruct
I don't think it's an amended motion.
Or, I'm sorry, but,
You'd have to withdraw support to amend.
right, so we could maybe do a motion saying we prohibit it right now, we can still instruct the planning commission to begin drafting this.
You could do that. You have two routes. Let's just put it right. You have two routes tonight. You do the moratorium route and instruct the planning commission to do work on this, or you do the ordinance prohibition route and you instruct the planning commission to do this. Either way, the planning commission is going to have to spend money. Under the prohibition route, they could wait until the state issues the law and then work on it, so they're spending the money more wisely. Under the moratorium, they must spend your money ASAP.
So you could change the wording of the motion to say prohibition rather than.
No, you'd have to enact the ordinance.
What, the motion?
You'd have to do the prohibition.
Does that ordinance have to go through the public hearing process, same as the
Regular ordinance adoption, right?
Can we call for a vote?
Yeah.
Yeah, is that your call to question? All right, there's a motion on the table to place a 6-month moratorium on this topic and the uses to send to the planning commission to develop ordinance schemes for these uses and to allow, or direct the village manager to plan a town hall meeting within 45 days of this date. That motion has been made and supported. Madam Clerk, roll call vote, please.
Kemp? Yes. Bailey?
Yes.
Helmut?
Yes.
Logan? Yes. Frost?
No. The motion carries, the ayes have it, and this council directs the planning commission to take immediate action to develop these ordinances and to place a moratorium.
And I don't think you have to take any action.
Well, whatever, yeah.
We'll just get busy.
Get busy, get busy.
Yeah, just- I mean, you don't need any action.
Actions are on words.
Right.
No vote tonight, you don't need to.
We'll get busy right away.
All right. So we're not done yet. That's the main body of this meeting. I assume that it seems like we're kind of done with this topic. Does that make sense of that? All right. We'll move on to public comment. Is there any public comment at this time?
Public comment?
I made my comment.
See no more public comment. Moving on to attorney and planner comments.
Oh, please, sir.
We'll just get to work.
Good dialogue. Excellent. I know, Mario, you sat through a lot of these meetings. I've sat through a lot of these meetings. A lot of similar dialogue. We'll keep an eye on the federal issue for both bodies, and I'll report to you as I learn things. I know my friends in the Coast Guard are gearing up on Lake St. Clair for the summer because they want to set an early onslaught of precedent that legalized marijuana does not mean you're allowed to be high on a recreational home in Michigan. So that'll be an interesting issue. That led to some problems like in communities like St. Clair Shores who border a federal waterway.
Well, we also border, so
Right.
100 miles.
Well, the waters are interesting because the communities we're grappling in their ordinance scheme, we're gonna allow these places, but they're gonna be so close to our marinas. It was like a little bit of a public comment on that issue, so you don't have that issue. Yeah, same issue.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mario, do you have anything further?
No, actually, just one point you brought up. Technically, yeah, there's an international border, but technically, it's completely illegal federally on the other side of it.
Right.
And so that's another, at least that's something else we don't have to worry about. But we'll get that second.
Council
Yeah,
comments?
but Mario, they don't have a military, so it's.
That's true. This mountain.
Council comments? Any council comments, Ms. Logan? Mrs. Summer? Mr. Bailey? Ms. Kemp? I'm sorry.
Question you should.
I do have one comment before we go. to thank each and every one of you for being here this evening. This is a tough decision, a tough topic. My hope is that 100 years from now, we will look back at this, maybe not us, but our descendants, and think, and compare it to the prohibition 100 years before this, with the alcohol. We are in a we're in a transformative time. And I really think it's very comparative to the 1920s and the issues that we were dealing with at that time. We're getting new street, new road. Last time it was dug up was in the 20s too. So, we really are moving forward, and I think we have some great leadership in this community on all of the entities, the planning commission, the ZBA, the council, and the village administration to move things forward in a systematic and intelligent way. So thank you all for your continued, support, comments, perspective, etc. I would like to do another one of these in the not so distant future, but including the DDA, and do it with the topic of just community visioning in general. Because I think as a community, very often we are on different pages, and that is very often a different page yet from the community forums that we see sometimes. So I'd like to continue the dialogue and continue the working relationship of all of the entities of this village. So those are my comments, and I'll pass it over to Mr. Douglas for any planning comments.
I want to echo those comments, Joe. I thank everybody for their willingness to participate in this session tonight. I think that some very good things came out of it. It's good to hear the dialogue, and I like the fact that everybody had an opportunity to speak, so thank you very much for that.
No, I'm sorry, I'm just adding a joke. Can we check in, I don't know, in due time to make sure that everyone's on the same page, so we don't, when their ordinances do come from you, that it's completely.
We should have on our ongoing agenda, our liaison to the planning commission should update village council at every meeting from now on.
And there's also a place on here for planning commission comments as well.
Right. So both bodies need to adjourn at some point.
Any further comments from the planning commission? All right, at this time, I'll entertain a motion from the village council to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn at 7:57.
Make a motion to adjourn the planning commission at 7:57.
Second.
Yes.
For a second from the council?
Second.
All right, there's a motion from the village council and support to adjourn at 7:57. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
Also have a motion to adjourn the planning commission meeting, and second for that. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.